All right, with that, I will turn it over to our presenter, Padma.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on joyful learning, engage and advance young learners with significant and complex learning needs. Thank you for joining us. What am I going to be talking about and addressing? The agenda is I will spend a little bit of time on the introduction, why it is critical and important that we engage the learner as part of this learning process. And then for that, the most important thing we have to consider are the universal design for learning principles that will be kind of our foundation to think how we can adapt the environment, the instruction, and the materials, and also the division for early childhood recommended practices. And the most of this session will be dedicated to how do we use hands-on activities? How do we use materials? How do we bring that attention and motivation of that learner into what we are teaching them? Through the materials, through the adaptation, through the instruction, and constructing your environment in an optimal manner, you are advancing your learner's language, cognitive, and social emotional development. And then we will have a conclusion. And as was mentioned, please put your questions that you may have in the Q&A box. I am an author of a number of books, and a lot of the material that I'm sharing is from those sources. I have a number of books as well as mini guides, and I'm an educational consultant. Also the founder and the president of a nonprofit organization, which focuses on empowering families to engage actively with their children to enrich their minds, because the school system, the teachers, educators, and families have to work actively together, collaborate in the success of the child. So, what brings me to this topic? As a consultant, I have had the pleasure and privilege of visiting hundreds of classrooms in a variety of states, and more specifically in Texas, but besides that in Louisiana and many other places, Arkansas and Alabama and all that. Some of the problems that I have observed in the classroom relates to the environment, the instruction, and the materials that are being used, especially addressing the needs of children with significant and complex learning needs. Before I even begin this presentation, one thing I would like to mention, because this is April. April is Autism Awareness Month. And especially for children with autism, we are still struggling to understand fully their characteristics, their communication approaches, their behaviors, and quite often, without a full grasp of their needs, we use techniques that do not address their needs comprehensively. With the result, even to this day, I am reading reports about children with autism being in a closed room as kind of a disciplinary measure. So with that, I hope in 2023 and onwards, we gain better understanding of children with autism as we celebrate the Autism Awareness Month. And especially for children with autism, the environment, the instruction, and the materials have to match their needs. One of the problems that I have observed is even in as early as an early childhood classroom, which should be vibrant and joyful and highly engaging, it sometimes is pretty dull. And the adult constantly directing and the children not being actively engaged. I'm sure none of these things happen in your classroom, but if you do have the position to influence other teachers, please, the environment needs to be very highly engaging. And then the instruction, which is the most critical element, we want to make sure there is active learner engagement. We tend to use very heavily intrusive prompting approaches. So we need to change that approach. And also the other thing I found is there is frequently some downtime. And when there is downtime, many children, especially those who have significant cognitive and behavioral needs, do not know how to adjust to that kind of downtime. And so we have to make sure there is continuous activity that engages children. And the other observation that I have seen, if you are in an inclusive classroom and you have a few children with significant and complex needs, frequently these children are having either a one-on-one paraeducator or one paraeducator maybe serving 2 students. Frequently, what I have observed is this paraeducator is assigned to that student, and that particular student has very limited opportunity to engage with other children or to engage in the mainstream activity that's going on in the classroom. And the paraeducator is continuously prompting. So are we promoting self-dependence? Are we promoting social interaction? These are some questions we need to ask. And how are we going to gauge the progress these children are making if they are being continuously being supported by an adult sitting next to them? And as I mentioned right at the very beginning, frequently our reactions to behavior issues are much more reactive. And as soon as we see a behavior issue, we tend to react strongly to stop the behavior, and we often send that child away from that group instruction. Or sometimes the children are sent to seclusion. And that doesn't provide any opportunity for that child to be engaged. And the last important thing, in the materials that we use, are the materials matched to the specific needs of the student? Is the student able to connect? For example, a lot of us use picture symbols, but not all children can connect, especially with those abstract picture symbols. We should try and use concrete representational materials so that the child can connect quickly with that object. So these are all some of the things that cause concerns, and hopefully some of the answers or some of the slides that you're going to see will help change and modify our materials, environment, and instruction. So let us look at what the student can do currently. That is the first step, understanding the learner's strengths and capabilities. Is the student at a level where the student can attend and listen to a story for a few minutes, focusing attention to the story? Is the student able to make choices? Is the student able to respond with a yes or no to questions that you ask? Is the student at a level where the student is able to recall some basic information that you have taught? Or is the student at a much higher level and able to answer what, where, and when question when something happened? Let's say you are relating a story and the student is able to recall this information. And then once they have learned some rules, let's say in the classroom, are they able to apply it in another place? That's one thing. Or if they have learned something, can they apply it to something else new that they are learning? They can recall that information and apply that. And one of the most important things we teach as we teach young children is to be able to draw a conclusion, not just young children, but all children, the summary and conclusion. Are they able to make a kind of a prediction after the story is read to them? These are all things we want to make sure we have the information as we proceed with instruction. You may have a student with more significant needs who is able to make a choice between given two choices, not multiple things that they have to select from, or to recall the information from no aids, but given representational objects connected to the topic, can they make a choice? Is the student has some motor difficulty and is able to use reach for an object with his hands or with her hands or with eye gaze or with a body movement or body orientation? That is the way the student responds. Is that the student's functioning level as far as motor needs are concerned? Is the student showing joy, vocalization in response to the person? Is the student smiling? Is the student showing change in affect? Is the student activating an AT device to respond to something without an adult moving his hand and physically prompting? Is the student independently responding to the question using the AT device? So these are all some basic questions we want to ask at the very beginning of planning our environment and instruction. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the important things that should be driving our instructional planning is the universal design for learning. So the first thing is the why of learning. Are we providing multiple flexible options for engagement so that it attracts the student's interest, offers appropriate challenge, but not too much of a challenge that that student gets turned off? And it gets the student to focus attention, and so the student can learn. Some of the things that I would like to see more of happening in classroom is dramatic play, a little bit of dramatic play, storytelling, playing games, using some songs. Instead of a kind of a very dry reading of a story, how can we make it more interactive? How can we give a role to the children to play so that they gain better understanding and comprehension of what is going on? Maybe computer software. And then how do we present that information in addition to that is the what of learning. We have to make sure it is in multiple formats and flexible methods. PowerPoint presentation, graphic organizers, simulation of activities, storyboards, physical concrete objects, photographs, manipulatives, beyond just the picture symbols. And then, are we providing that student with flexible, multiple approaches in how the student responds, the action and expression, the how of learning? The student may verbally respond, the student may point to something, the student may manipulate picture symbols or concrete objects, or respond using an AT device without an adult pushing his or her hand. So we need to think in terms of universal design for learning, in terms of the engaging the student, presenting the material, and for the student to be able to respond in a variety of ways. So this is a kind of a pictorial slide showing the application of universal design for learning. Are we using kind of a graphic organizers? Are we using storytelling, role play? And when we are teaching math, are we moving a step further and using concrete objects? The same addition picture that this one shows. The student gets to drop maybe one little tiny ball or a puffed ball, and then another one, and then take both of that, 1 plus 1, and drops it in the last third one. They get to feel, and that goes to their brain immediately because they are feeling and touching. And that is necessary for some children who have difficulty with abstract numbers. So are we using these concrete items to connect with the learner? Are we using storyboards? When they see these pictures and they can touch and remove them and feel them and put them back, then they connect with that concept much more of the story characters and the story events. And then when they are responding, are we giving them a choice board? And are we giving them too many choices? Are we limiting the choice to 2 or 3? And once they master, then maybe an array of choices. Are we using some of these tools? And in order to increase that action and expression, what kind of environmental adjustments can we make? One of the first things that I would suggest is to minimize that adult proximity. So if we have a child who has a paraeducator, usually assigned, can the paraeducator move around and not sit right within 3 feet of that student, so that the student is not always looking to the paraeducator for all her responses? And so the paraeducator does not feel compelled to constantly prompt the student. Our goal ultimately is self-dependence. And teachers have argued with me that this particular student reaches across his desk and he may disturb others or he may grab things from them. Can we provide a kind of a visual boundary around that desk and teach the student to keep his hands and feet within that boundary that is kind of created with masking tape or colored tape around his desk? And of course, it's not going to happen overnight. We have to maybe teach for a few weeks and remind the student, your space. This is your space, and teach him that to respect that space and not reach across. And then the other thing is sometimes when you walk into a classroom, you find that there are so many displays on the wall, which can be overstimulating, especially for a child with autism. So can we limit, like there is no need to have multiple number or math number walls, number displays, vocabulary. You need just one, maybe rules that's required, posted, and vocabulary words paired with concrete items or pictures, real pictures, and not just picture symbols, and then changed every 3 weeks or 4 weeks as you change teaching the new vocabulary. So limit the number of items that are displayed on the wall and remove the clutter that may cause more confusion and overstimulation. That's something easy to accomplish. And then making sure that we provide the instructional support during the activities and the routines, multisensory techniques, concrete representation to build concept knowledge. And then in between, weave some movement activities. We don't often think about it, but when we are making a change, a transition from one activity to another, that's a great time. If they are very young children, we can say, oh, we just had the story of the Are You My Bird? Are You My Mother? I'm sorry. Are You My Mother? They can say, oh, can we fly like a bird? What do birds do? What do they have? And you're building the cabin. They have wings. And what do they use the wings for? They fly. Can we fly like a bird? That may be. Or can we crawl like a worm? Can we walk like a dog? So you can infuse that. For a slightly older children, that's a great time to build in some calming breaths. Oh, let's do yoga posture. And then let's take some calming breaths. So that transition is made into an activity. It's not, oh, you need to sit down, you need to stand up, you are not doing this. We tend to be, oh, you need to get your mat. No, instead, that kind of transition is you have some kind of a movement activity or a calming activity, and then they are ready for the next activity because they have had the opportunity to relax, to engage in a kind of a joyful movement or a quiet, calming activity. So that, and the other thing is role play. I mean, the pretending to be like birds is role play, or use some kind of a music, calming music. These are things, even if it is just used for 3 or 4 minutes, it increases the focus and attention for the next activity. And the other thing that I often do not see, there are a number of words on the word wall, far too many words. So if we can limit the number of words, and especially for students who need that additional level of support, match some concrete objects or photographs next to that. And then one of the things that I often recommend is, as the children are walking out of the classroom for recess or at the end of the day, that's a great time to have that vocabulary word practiced. I mean, if you have a paraeducator standing in front of the children as they are walking out to the bus or to the playground, that's a great time to review those words. And you can post it right close to the exit. And then make sure the personalized adaptations are matched to the individual child's need. One of the things that I have found is sometimes we do not begin with an assistive technology communication device that is matched to the communication level of that child. It has far too many things for the student to be able to handle. And usually I find the adult takes the child's finger and presses that. The child continues in that dependent mode and is really not learning how to use that. So we need to begin with something simpler, with fewer icons, and then something, a storyboard. And then every child has an opportunity to participate, touch, feel, come to the front and point to what you are talking about during the story. These are ways to build their attention and involvement and make it joyful. And the Division for Early Childhood has a variety of suggestions for child-focused strategies on environment, instructional practices, adult-child interaction, and also how to involve the family. And the practitioners, the teachers, work with the family and other adults, and you can visit their websites to get the more information. So let's take the poll. Okay. This is going to take a while. We have a lot of people. Okay, it looks like everybody has answered. And we do have a lot of assistive technology specialists and not any special education. Oh, there are some special education teachers and a lot of paraprofessional, a lot of speech. Okay, and you can all make a difference in communicating about the Division for Early Childhood Practices and the Universal Design Fund. Thank you. And we have another poll immediately. And let me see if I can pull that poll. Okay. Which environmental and instructional supports do you routinely use to engage learners with significant needs? Okay, wonderful. A lot of you use the UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And nice to see that a lot of you do have a designated calming space rather than the timeout and seclusion area. That's very heartwarming. We have a great team here who have joined us. The physical prompts and 43% of you say that you don't, you ensure intrusive prompts are not used and you play games. And I'm going to share the results. What is great is you do use different tasks to meet different needs. Yes, that's great. 76% of you. And 47%, that is, as I said, it's very fulfilling to see you do use a calming space. As I said, the people who have joined are already people who are dedicated to making a difference for children. Okay, we will go on to the next slide. So here are some examples of how we adapt our environment and instruction. One of the things is at the beginning of instruction, we need to draw the students' attention by using hands-on activities and multisensory features. And this is all based on research, use of real life activities, and then helping the student to familiarize herself or himself with touching, looking, listening, and smelling, a variety of ways to engage the learner. One of the things, let's say if you're using a little slant board, is there a way to put some pictures there for that particular student's attention and tap on the picture, or use a flashlight to shine on it? That's another way to engage the students. We may have a larger teaching area, but we also, that is where the para-educator may be able to provide that extra attention if needed. And it's extremely critical that we draw the student's attention. If the student is looking here and there and not involved, then either our activity is not engaging the attention, or we need to do something more for that student to draw that attention. So can we give that student a role to play in that story, so that the student is not touching another student, is not looking at something on the floor, is not wandering, getting up from his seat and wandering around? So can we provide that student with a role to play? He holds something, he turns the pages of the book, or he holds a kind of a story prop related to that story or to that lesson. And these are all variety of tools, storyboards, and things that you can use to draw and make the student involved in that lesson. And what would creative instruction look like? Rethink and switch to a preferred option from maybe a current situation that you find is not effective enough to engage and sustain the focus and attention of the. Can you begin your lesson with a kind of a magic bag? And what do we have in the magic bag? Do we have a little puppet? Oh, what's this puppet? And maybe that, or it may be something like a slinky of a grouchy ladybug. Can we do that so that, they all, especially that student who is likely to be wandering around, could that student hold that object and show it to everybody? Unfortunately, our tendency is that child who wanders around, or the child who engages in inappropriate behavior, tends to be sent to timeout or moved away from the group. But instead, let us begin with giving that child a role to play. Maybe he's the one who is holding the magic bag and you take out the items, or he's the one who is holding the story prop. And the other thing that I have often suggested is to have a Dyson mat when the child is not able to control and things keep sliding off his paper. Can we have a Dyson mat and put that paper on there? Build up the the handles of tools that they use, so that with Play-Doh or with foam, so that the child is not struggling to hold that. Adapted brushes, slant boards, considering seating options. Sometimes we have students sitting in their wheelchair. Is there a wedge that we can use so that the student is also sitting at the same level as others instead of sitting? Or I have even sometimes seen students just kind of lying on the floor. We shouldn't be having that. There is a way for at least 15, 20 minutes of that instruction lesson. Can we have that student sit alongside others so that the child feels part of it? is there a way, if the child engages in inappropriate behavior, prior to that, can we have the child hold maybe a fidget toy, something like this? Or if the child is completely out of control, is there a calming space? We can use a timed amount of time, which is pre-timed. So maybe 3 minutes, and then make sure the student is back joining. And this may require several attempts in the beginning. So we have to role play and act out stories, use finger play or puppet play, movement activity. It'll be fantastic if we are doing, let's say, a story about animals, and then immediately following that story to build that concept of that particular animal. How does a peacock, what about a peacock? We are learning about a peacock. What do the peacocks do? Do they dance? Can we dance like a peacock? Oh, what do frogs do? So immediately that imagination is captured, and they have a joyful activity following that story. The actions and the animal names and the vocabulary has a better chance of staying in their brain because they performed a movement related to that. For example, in math, instead of just counting at the table or counting at the desk, can you have like 3 or 4 hula hoops? And for children who are very high functioning, who are doing, let's say, addition or subtraction, you have that math item, and you have students throw little bean bags into that. And for a child who is just learning to count to 3, instead of throwing 10, we will begin with 3 and then advance to 5, advance to 7. Can you throw 2 bean bags into the hula hoop? And how much fun that would be compared to always looking at the number and then trying to count blocks or balls. This would be they are throwing, they are engaged in action. And then when they are responding to questions, can we limit the choices to 2, 3? And then during transitions, when we have difficulty with the students lining up or staying in place as they are walking, can we pair them together so that one child who is generally following the rules has another child, and the child who has maybe difficulty connecting with other children can hold or walk with another child, and then play pretend games. These are all ways we influence children's thinking, build their focus and attention, and make learning joyful and fun. So they look forward to learning a lesson next time. For example, this is a storyboard that you can think of in the same manner with other stories as well, but building literacy and language. You create a storyboard. This is for the story of Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman. What is the story about? What is one thing that happened in the story? And then pair that with either, the children make in art. They may not draw all the pictures, but you have the pictures, and they may make it kind of the headband for that. They may attach it. They may help you. They may help color it. And you make all this, or you make kind of little puppets using paper bags. So you teach the concept, but you also act out the story. You move and pretend like various animals, and you do not have to have a different story every day. Taking one story, extending it for a week, and demonstrating different activities associated with that, and then practicing the movement, by the end of the week, they would have a good concept of what's a dog, what's a cat, what's a hen, what's a boat, what's the mama bird and the baby bird, and the whole story's concept and what happened. That is the baby bird going and searching for the mother bird. And then you act out the story, you role play the different characters, and that firmly is planted in their mind. And then they get the story concept because of the role play, because of the pretend games, because of all the associated activities like the storytelling. And then their vocabulary increases. They may not be able to actually name, but they will be able to make a choice given, was the baby bird looking for mama bird, mother bird, or was the baby bird looking for a tiger? Given those two choices, they will be clearly. Did the baby bird see a cow, or did the baby bird see a penguin? So making that clear choice so that at least their thinking skills now are developed. And gradually they will be able to use an assistive technology device, assuming they have communication difficulties, to respond to the questions. And then you can create a word wall, pairing the vocabulary associated with the story and connecting some concrete items or a three-dimensional kind of a picture or a headband or photographs. And I'm going to share with you another story that's popular in the early childhood with young learners. But this is a story, even though it's meant for younger children, you can adapt it to slightly older children, to the carrot seed, because it's a great story for teaching persistence and handling challenging kind of responses from others. It's a beautiful story about a little boy who found a seed, and he is so persistent that despite everybody telling him that the carrot is not going to grow into a plant, he does, and he succeeds. So this is a great story to illustrate visual activities, tactile activities. They can touch the book, they can plant a seed, I can watch the carrot to grow. You can grow carrot in a variety of ways, as a seed or as a mini carrot, and see the plant growing. And they can hold and touch a carrot, they can taste a carrot if they are allowed to eat carrots, and then they can make their own little book about growing something else, growing a flower. And there are some other books Eric calls the tiny seed or something like that. And you can combine various books and connect it with this. And they can taste and smell a carrot, and they can do a role play and drama. It can be about the concept of family, father, mother, child, brother, maybe even a sister you can make up. And all of these things can be done in a much more joyful, playful, motivating manner. And so when you're reading a story, instead of reading it in a kind of a very flat manner, can you show that emotion and the action and the expression? And you can have your students illustrate, demonstrate, maybe, oh, do you want to come, Brian? Do you want to come and show everybody how a bird flies? Do you want to show everybody the carrot that we have for this? Do you want to show everybody? And so, especially that child who is somewhat fidgety, you give that opportunity for that student to come and stand up and show everybody. And then as you're reading, have a little bit of drama in your voice and use storytelling techniques that pair with, let's say you are doing the hungry caterpillar. Can you have a caterpillar image? And when you are doing, let's say, a math activity, can you use dice like this? And can they throw the dice or toss the dice? And then can they tell you how many dots on that? So when you introduce and embed a little bit of play, it becomes more fun. It is not thought of by the brain as more work, but much more play. And then, as I said, incorporate music and movement as part of that. And one of the games I love, and we had a learning fair recently for families, and we demonstrated this, that families can do this even while on the go. And that is, can you think of all the things that go on the pizza and give every child an opportunity to name an item that they would like to have on the pizza or on a sandwich or on an ice cream? And then for that child who is not able to generate a name or generate the vocabulary word, can you show two pictures, one that would go on a pizza and then one something like a crayon? Can you put a crayon? No. But can you put mushroom? Yes. So they may be yes or no answer, but you have given, and they're all playing as a group game. So, and then of course you can also pair it with alternate spinner and put the pictures there, and the children can have activating it. When you are doing math, is there a way you can create a pattern? Of course, you can use blocks, or you can use one of these things, and then the child makes a choice. And then when you're teaching math for the child who needs an additional level of concrete item, can we have bells? So number 5 or number 2, and then again, that makes it fun. And then have a graduated number line on the for older children, where you can have just the dots as is shown on this picture here, or you can attach small items, buttons maybe, and glue it on. So, and for a child who is struggling with recognizing, recognizing members and does not yet have that idea of the total number counted, can we reduce it to 5 and just attach 5 items, maybe in a little mini bag with some belts inside it? Can we use a sorting tray? Can we use dice to teach math concepts? One of the things that I have often observed is we usually have the paraeducator working with the child, and the child paraeducator has maybe a number of little blocks or usually bears with younger children. And then as soon as the child has counted, say, give me 5, and the child gives you 4, and the child is looking at the paraeducator's face, and then the child gives 1 more, and you close the hand. What it is really a prompted response, because if you keep your hands open and the child keeps on giving after 5, that shows the child has not yet developed the cardinal principle. So we need to also make sure that we don't close our hands and we don't inadvertently prompt the child. And in terms of social emotional, how do we strengthen social emotional? There are a variety of books, but I just am sharing with you 3 fantastic books. One is The Grouchy Ladybug. That's a great book. I'm sure many of you are thinking. It may be for preschool and kindergarten children, but it also is, we can take the theme from the story and create our own little story based on that, to teach the grouchiness and why that doesn't work and how it is important to be friendly. And that's one opportunity to teach the feelings. The other great book is On Monday When It Rained. It shows a variety of feelings and fantastic photographs. Even though it may be for younger children, but the photographs and the text that goes with that in that book, to me, is kind of almost can be used at practically any age, except you may not want to show the little boy's picture, but you might want to show it as an example of different kinds of feeling, because it even uses words like proud and embarrassed and all that. And that, the sooner we begin teaching these different feelings, the better it is for the child, because you are using stories, you can combine it with situations. And one of the beautiful games that you can play is the charades game, and have the children play, display emotions. Can you make a sad face? Can you make a happy face? Or if they are not able to do that, can they at least hold something that shows a sad face or a happy face? So the other fantastic, another book to calm down is When Sophie Gets Really, Really Angry. That's another thing. Again, it's for younger children, but you can adapt it to older children as well. And one of the other things that I think is very important is have a group activity where you are connecting. What is something that makes you happy? What is something that makes you sad? What are all the different things that may make you angry? But when we are angry, we need to go tell somebody, but we don't express that anger in a bad way, in a negative way. We have to express that emotion safely. And then when they are scared of something, when there is a fire drill and then they get scared, then what do? We reach out, need help. So, and then to have a calming space in the room. And the other thing you may be already familiar with, that is the turtle technique. That is how to calm down when feeling agitated or angry or upset. That is available from CSE FEL, and maybe most of you are already familiar with that. And when we are addressing problem behaviors, the best thing to do is to examine and evaluate our reactions, our responses, and to be able to redirect. So I have a guide, mini guide, that's available from it at 311. It talks about strategies, how to be proactive, how to be reflective in your approach to the child. How do we enable the instructional environment, the adaptations, and the materials to make sure that the child is enabled, and that prevents the problem behavior. And then from time to time, examine and evaluate, verify if your intervention approaches are working, and engage the child with motivating and joyful activities. And then collaborate with others, including the family, on preventing the problem behaviors. And of course, you are teaching replacement behaviors for that problem behaviors, and you can use talking brick and to teach counting breaths, and you can use puppets to teach feelings and how to express them safely. And I'm sharing with you a variety of options for children to actively respond. I have already discussed most of them. Some children may respond in complete sentences. Some children may be yes, no participation call. Some will point to picture cues. Some will need objects. Some will make a choice. Some will touch and manipulate the item. And a lot of them can use an assistive technology device to communicate their responses. But the most important thing I want you to take away is that choice making is a very powerful thing. It teaches children that they can exercise control over their environment. And so that is something we need to focus on and train, and it will also make the children feel that they are in charge. And these are all the different kinds of supports. For example, if you're doing the Chicka Chicka Boom Boom story, the alphabet cards, make alphabet cards. And then maybe hide it in different places and they look for it and search for it and make it like a game. And if you're doing the Giving Tree story, you can have a story prop and one child can hold that and another child can pretend to be the little boy, another child could be pretend to be the tree, and you know, let them express their feelings through holding a puppet in their hand or a emotion card. Our goal is to enable the students' self-dependence. And so make games a routine, playing games a routine, and make sure the students have an opportunity to be actively engaged. One of the things I do want to mention, you do have it in your handout, and to follow the hierarchy of prompts, to be alert and to be aware that we are not constantly using physical prompting, but we are gradually reducing the intrusive prompt, because our goal is independent performance without any assistance. So go through these prompts and see if you're always physically prompting the student or gradually reducing it to partial, to gesture prompt, modeling, verbal prompt, and then maybe verbal cue. Using the appropriate level of prompt is the only way we can make sure we are engaging and involving the student actively in learning. Now we have another poll. What would you like to add to your instructional practice? Instruction paired with concrete representational items. I think that's extremely important. I had a lot more materials I wanted to share with you, but always in my presentation, I always find that I exceed the time. I do not want to exceed the time and keep you too long. Okay, I see that they're all, many of you want to minimize physical prompting, which is good, and you're going to increase your games. I think games and role play and storytelling and concrete are all good avenues to increase learner engagement. As you can see, we have almost similar initiatives expressed by most of you. Okay, I am going to move on to the next slide. And so to kind of summarize whatever I shared with you, how do we engage and enrich learners with joyful learning? Storytelling, drama, role play, and puppets. That will definitely strengthen your learners' focus and attention. Play games, charades game, just a few minutes. And then if you have a mirror and show it to the mirror, when show them the mirror when they are showing a sad face or a scared face. That will increase their motivation. Play charades game, have a hula hoop and let them toss little dice or little bean bags in there for the counting. Or you can have an addition statement and they can make the addition using the hula hoop. That will change their love for learning from maybe I don't like math to I love math. Teach self-calming strategies. Blend in movement. Watch your prompts. Make effective use of assistive technology so that the student is actually making that advancement in moving from, using a more complex device from a very simple one. And concrete items, photographs, and not just picture symbols. And team and collaborate for student success. So these are all the tools or resources, books that I have written that I used, plus other research. And these are all the resources. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. And you will have the handout that maybe give you a little bit more detail than maybe what I shared with you. And the next webinar is on May 2nd. It is following up on the behavior issues that I touched. It will focus on cultivating calmness, concentration, and coping skills. In order to build that concentration, we really need a motivating environment, which is what I talked about. Motivating environment, instruction, and adaptations and materials. Next time, it's much more on cultivating calmness and concentration and coping skill. Thank you very much. Have a great day and a great year. And there are a number of questions. I will Okay, one of the questions that I will read. You mentioned continuous active engagement rather than downtime. The school day is long for my students with multiple and severe disabilities. It is hard to have continuous active engagement for 6.5 hours. How can we fill these times? Does structured choice time count? Blocks Monday. But even with this, how can fill 400 minutes of a day for severe profound students? Excellent question. I'm going to go ahead and answer the question. And that is, when I said active engagement, in other words, the students are involved in some activity. Instead of turning on a video, which I often have seen, which makes no sense for many of our students, you can have a video maybe for 3 minutes. But what I was talking about was having some kind of a movement activity. Maybe listening to some music and maybe waving their arms or shaking their legs or showing a facial expressions. It is possible to have a variety of diverse activities blended into the day instead of the students just sitting there, because when they're sitting there, not engaged in an activity, what happens is it causes behavioral issue because they are bored. The other thing is a bit of painting. Maybe you can use adapted brushes with, you can attach it to a glove with a Velcro, and you can use a brush, and they can paint or move their hands and color. And then maybe if you sprinkle some glue, and then they can make a collage out of that. So you can have art activities. You can have movement activities. They can listen to some music and wave some scarves. So there are a variety of activities that are engaging, that are motivating, that are joyful, that could be embedded during the day. It can be role play. It can be storytelling. It can be somebody from a higher grade comes and reads a story or acts out a story. So there are a variety of these. The other question, I hope I have answered that question. The next question is, can we please get a link or emailed graduated number line that was shown? Yes, I'll be happy to send a graduated number line. And I find you can adapt it and attach many objects to numbers, and you can reduce it to 5. And for example, in answer to the previous question, you can have a graduated number line that they are working on attaching objects. Thank you. I think I have done that one too. There are no more questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Padmaja, for your expertise. Another wonderful presentation. For those of you still with us, if you're looking to earn ASHA CEUs, be sure to complete that assessment. I put the link in the chat. You'll also receive that in an email tomorrow in about 24 hours. There will be the link there. You can also email ableU@ablenetinc.com. Thank you for attending and have a great day.